No one likes a band that gets too big for their own good. Throughout music history, many bands have let ego and pride get to them and released some of the worst music they would ever create. Any sensible fan would abandon them without hesitation, but everyone also loves an underdog story. A lot of these bands have made some very poor choices in the past that left them dead in the water. These include everything from losing band members to overcoming a shift in direction or just letting the rock star lifestyle get to them. Regardless of how they got there, these albums are the greatest examples of bands picking up the pieces of their broken legacy and building themselves back up again. It may have been a long road back to where they were, but these albums show how determined these guys were to go for broke no matter the consequences. These songs may have had traces of the band's original sound inside them, but going back to their roots was just what these musicians needed to rediscover their love of their craft. I am Kirsten from WhatCulture Music, and these are 10 bands that saved their career with one album. Number 10, Creatures of the Night by Kiss. At the end of the 70s, Kiss had started to create gaping holes in their music legacy. After years of being at the top of the hard rock sphere, the band's flirtations with styles like disco and power pop had culminated in Music from the Elder, a concept record that fell into obscurity. With half of the original band long gone at this point, Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley needed a miracle if they wanted to click with rock fans again. When Creatures of the Night finally arrived in the early 80s, the band had reignited that initial fire they had with new drummer Eric Carr, whose style was more in line with metal music. This album also showed the band embracing their hard rock glory days, with Stanley writing fantastic riffs on the title track, as well as his most dynamic vocal performance on the ballad I Still Love You. Given that the band would take their makeup off soon after this, Simmons' I Love It Loud is one of the final great character pieces the hard rock world got from his demon persona. Though the album was a true return to form, it had a bit of a lukewarm reception from fans who had jumped ship after the disco years. It may not have sold like gangbusters, but this album reminded the rock world why Kiss were the almighty lords of rock. Number 9, Beggars, Banquet by the Rolling Stones. As the British invasion buzz started to wear off towards the mid-60s, the key players in this scene were either moving on from their initial sound or fading into the background. While plenty of musicians were left by the wayside, the Rolling Stones persevered and became one of the most interesting acts in the scene this side of the Beatles. Though not every experiment worked, the Stones were on the verge of something unprecedented with Beggars, Banquet. Up until this point, the band had come off their psychedelic album, Their Satanic Majesty's Request, which was deemed rubbish by Mick Jagger because of the more outlandish production choices. Appearing as the polar opposite of psychedelia, Beggars Banquet is the sound of the band getting back in touch with the bluesy material they fell in love with as kids, with each song touching everything from country to blues to rock and roll. This is also the point where the Stones' darker lore becomes very real, with Sympathy for the Devil sounding far more dangerous than Satisfaction. However, this road to legendary had a few bumps, with Brian Jones spiralling out on drugs and dying shortly after leaving the band. Though they may have lost their six-string cornerstone, Beggars Banquet was the one Rolling Stones album that brought them from adolescent teenagers to seasoned blues veterans. Number 8, Permanent Vacation by Aerosmith. Every sensible rock fan would have thought that Aerosmith was down for the count at the beginning of the 80s. After a massive blow-up between band members, guitarist Joe Perry and Brad Whitford parted ways with the group, leaving the band a shadow of what they once were. It was time to pack it in, but no one could have guessed that the band would end up redefining themselves for a new generation. As the band patched things up with their guitarists, Perry and Whitford returned to the fold for Done With Mirrors, a hard rock effort that was left at the door. Though the return to form wasn't happening just yet, the band's collaboration with Run DMC on their version of Walk This Way left fans curious as to what would come next. Dropping in the midst of hair metal, Permanent Vacation set the bad boys from Boston up with the Motley Crues of the world in prime fashion. Though it may seem like a controversial decision now, the band's use of outside songwriters made songs like Ragdoll and Angel some of the biggest tunes of their career. It may have been a step towards poppier material, but that gritty energy from the band's early days made them superstars all over again. Number 7, 5150 by Van Halen. Replacing a lead singer of your band seems like a near impossible feat once you hit big. With many people singling out the vocalist as the mouth of the group, it's almost unthinkable for a band to continue on without their star behind the mic. That kind of blow would be rough for any band, but David Lee Roth leaving Van Halen should have meant death. Roth was one of the most characteristic vocalists in the rock sphere, whose presence would be felt in every aspect of the band's new material. On the other hand, Eddie Van Halen knew the band would have another life after Sammy Hagar came down to jam with the guys. Not only would Sammy write and play guitar, but he also had a searing vocal delivery that stood apart from Roth's bluesy territory. Ducking into the studio, the band forged ahead with 5150, which became one of the biggest resurgences of the decade. Across just 9 tracks, Hagar proves to be the right guy for the job on songs like Why Can't This Be Love and Dreams, which are some of the most emotional songs that the band have ever written up to that point. Any other band should have finished at Roth's departure, but Van Halen were a much different beast than anyone could have imagined. Number 6, Blizzard of Oz by Ozzy Osbourne. For as much of a household name as he is now, it seems like an eternity since Ozzy Osbourne wasn't in the public eye. His cult of personality as the frontman of Black Sabbath and an impressive solo career has put him in the top tier for most metal singers. Then again, Osbourne was dangerously close to being viewed as a hard rock has-been at the start of the 80s. Being booted from Sabbath for his drug abuse, Osbourne spent his early solo career getting strung out on drugs before his manager Sharon helped him to recover. Assembling a solo band behind him, Osbourne was floored by guitarist Randy Rhoads, whose leads were unlike anything the metal world had ever heard. Once the band ventured into the studio, Blizzard of Oz marked Osbourne's second rise to the top. With Rhoads' riffs as his anchor, Osbourne sounds like a new man on this record, with songs like Mr. Crowley and Crazy Train having a hopeful tone amid the morbid subject matter. The music definitely was brighter than the sounds of Tony Iommi, but Osbourne's trademark howls sounded stronger than ever. Sabbath may have been doing fine with Ronnie James Dio, but Osbourne's refusal to fade away quietly yielded one of the greatest metal albums of the decade. Number 5, Californication by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Out of all the alternative bands rising to prominence in the early 90s, the Red Hot Chili Peppers were by far the most original. With their unique brand of funk, rock and hip-hop, the entire band felt like a small musical brotherhood whose musical chemistry almost seemed telepathic. Once John Frusciante left the band though, that lack of telepathy wasn't lost on the fans. Though the band's follow-up album One Hot Minute was certainly not bad, the arrival of new guitarist Dave Navarro seemed to really turn fans off. Coupled with vocalist Anthony Kiedis getting hooked on hard drugs left the future of the band uncertain. Quickly firing Dave Navarro, a musical miracle occurred at the end of the decade with Californication. After reconciling their differences, Frusciante was back in the fold, contributing some of the most melodic guitar parts of the band's career on songs like Scar Tissue and Parallel Universe. Kiedis also found ways to expand his vocal chops on this record, quickly shifting from his usual free-flowing percussive singing style to traditional singing for most of the songs here. The Chili's had been through the ringer more than a few times at this point, but Californication let the rock world know that their musical foundation could weather anything. Number 4, Band on the Run by Wings. The collective music world almost had a day of mourning when the Beatles announced their breakup. With the Fab Four finally calling it a day, the idealism of the 60s seemed to be slowly fading from view. Though Paul McCartney had a decent start to his solo career on his debut and Ram, forming Wings with his wife Linda had a shaky start to say the least. This new outfit for the cute Beatle was thought to be disastrous at first, with his first offering Wildlife being nothing more than jams and Red Rose Speedway, aiming to capture audiences on the strength of McCartney's Beatle goodwill. After half of the band quit in protest, Paul, Linda and Denny Lane went to Nigeria and crafted the greatest success of the band's career. Band on the Run was certainly not the first time Paul had seen success, but it did get him back in good favour with the pop charts, with songs like the title track and Jet becoming staples of his solo career. People may have still been seeing McCartney as a shell of his former self, but Band on the Run is the one album in his catalogue that could go toe-to-toe with any of his 60s work. Number 3, American Idiot by Green Day. When Green Day first emerged onto the scene, they were a breath of fresh air for rock fans after the death of the grunge scene. With songs from Seattle going by the wayside, these brats gave rock a snot-nosed energy on Dookie, where they brought punk to the masses. Then the band had to commit the one cardinal sin of any pop-punk band: growing up. Though the band did have some fairly strong albums amid the course of the late 90s and 2000s, albums like Warning and Nimrod left many pining for the tight 3-minute anthems from Dookie. A return to form seemed like the logical next step, but these guys shattered our expectations with American Idiot. Instead of going back to the tuneful punk rock in full, this album was a full-fledged concept album in the vein of The Who or Pink Floyd, following the trek of a young punk kid through the big city. Any self-respecting punk wouldn't stand for this kind of lavish production, but Green Day managed to reach every corner of the rock sphere with this album, from the episodic tune Jesus of Suburbia to ballads like Boulevard of Broken Dreams. Punk was all about simplicity, but it was also about staying true to yourself, and with American Idiot, Green Day took the gamble and made it to the other side unscathed. Number 2, Metallica by Metallica. Most hardcore Metallica fans are probably skeptical as to why the Black Album saved the band's career. If anything, the glossy sound of the album and experimentation with new styles were seen by many as a nail in the band's coffin. However, Metallica may have been on a darker path than most people are willing to admit. Yes, almost every song the band released in the 80s could be considered a classic, but things look to be a bit fractured by the time of And Justice for All. Though the playing was great on the record, Metallica were getting dangerously close to sounding monotonous after doing 4 albums of pure thrash metal. Even though the band had survived the death of bassist extraordinaire Cliff Burton, a remake of Justice would have been a step backwards, and may have even caused the demise of the band. Instead of continuing down that road, the band were itching to write simpler songs compared to their earlier material, which came to life once Bob Rock came into the picture as producer. Assembling their biggest hits yet, the sounds of songs like Sad But True and Enter Sandman brought the band from thrash metal titans to one of the modest musical gods. A song like Nothing Else Matters may seem a bit saccharine to metalheads, but it's better to have one slow song amid the bunch than not having Metallica at all. Number 1, Everything Will Be Alright in the End by Weezer. Following their breakup in the 90s, Weezer were a very different band once they reformed at the beginning of the 2000s. Uncomfortable with the reception of their sophomore release Pinkerton, Rivers Cuomo quickly adjusted his songwriting to be centered around traditional pop rock soundscapes. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but that approach seemed to be wearing thin by the end of the decade. After the abysmal Raditude and the lackluster reception of Hurley, the band seemed to be burned out and a caricature of their firmer nerd rock selves. Once the band regrouped, Everything Will Be Alright in the End revitalised their entire career in one fell swoop. With the guitars back in full force and Cuomo delivering fantastic guitar solos, this album was easily the best the band had sounded in over a decade. The return to form felt all the more sweeter once you got a hold of the lyrics, which were all about the band rebuilding themselves from the ground up. From the glorious opening of Back to the Shack to the photo-finish guitars of the Future Scope trilogy, the album was both a return to the band's glory days while also giving us something that we didn't even know we wanted. After years of trying to blend into the pop crowd, Weezer had finally done right by their fans and delivered a stunning record. And there you are, the 10 bands that saved their career with one album. But let us know your favourites down in the comments below. If you liked this video, make sure you give it a big old thumbs up, and if you haven't already, click that subscribe button as well as that little bell icon to be notified of any new videos coming your way. But for now, I have been Kirsten Ria from WhatCulture Music, and I will see you in the next video.